They came for her at dawn. The fog hadn't yet lifted from the hills when 3 riders cloaked in royal blue thundered into the village of Cavan's Hollow. Their horses, slick with sweat and bearing the gold-stitched emblem of the crown, kicked up the red dust of the main road. Villagers stepped aside, blinking in disbelief. No one of importance ever came here, and certainly not men from the capital. Elira had just finished washing the knight's bread pots when she saw them dismount. She thought at first that they had come for someone else. The healer's boy, perhaps. He had charm and straight teeth and could read. Or maybe Marwyn, the baker's daughter, who had caught the eye of a traveling merchant last spring. But the guards came straight for her. "You are Elira of House Nunn?" one asked, his face unreadable beneath his steel cap. He didn't wait for her to respond before nodding to another. "She matches the description." What description?" Elira stammered, drying her hands on her apron. Her mother stepped in front of her, a fluttering shadow. "She's done nothing wrong," her mother said quickly. "She hasn't left the village. We've no debts to the crown." "You've no reason to fear," the guard said almost kindly. "Your daughter has been chosen for a royal honor." Elira's mother paled. "What kind of honor?" "She will be wed. To the king." The courtyard fell quiet. Even the chickens stopped scratching the earth. Elira blinked, unsure if she had misheard. "But the king is dead," she said slowly. The guard's eyes didn't waver. "All the more reason the ritual must be completed. The kingdom depends on it." They gave her family 1 hour to prepare. Elira packed what little she had: a comb with missing teeth, her father's faded prayer beads, a wool cloak she'd outgrown last winter. Her mother cried the entire time, though no words came out. Her father, long silent from illness, pressed a trembling kiss to her forehead and didn't let go until the guards pulled her gently away. She was not allowed to ride beside them. She rode in the back of the last horse, side saddle, the reins held by a stable boy. Her hair whipped behind her like a thread unraveling from cloth. They traveled for 2 days. The palace rose like a wound out of the mountain, all gray stone and iron spikes. It was nothing like the sketches she'd seen in storybooks. The banners were still half-mast. The mourning drapes hung heavy across the battlements. And yet, inside the great hall, there were fresh flowers. "We are to present her to the Queen Regent," a guard told a steward. "The wedding is tomorrow." Elira was not taken to a bridal suite. She was led to a tower room that smelled of vinegar and old smoke. A dress had been laid out for her on the bed, pale silver lined with moth-eaten fur and stiff at the sleeves. The maid who brought her food would not meet her eyes. That night Elira paced the room until her feet ached. She wanted to scream, but the walls were thick and the cold did not permit rage. She did not sleep. At dawn she was bathed, by gloved women who never spoke, and dressed in the stiff silver gown. Her hair was brushed until her scalp burned. The hall outside buzzed with unseen footsteps, none of them hurrying. When they came for her again, it was the Queen Regent herself who greeted her. Tall, wrapped in velvet darker than blood. Hair bound in braids like rope. Her face was not cruel but entirely devoid of warmth. "You understand," she said, "that this marriage is a sacred duty? The old king's soul will not rest until he is sealed with a bride." "Why me?" Elira asked. The Queen Regent smiled and something flickered behind her eyes. "The spirits chose you. As they chose me once." Elira was taken to the inner sanctum, where the king lay in repose. It was not a coffin. It was a throne. His body, draped in cloth of gold and pinned with heavy gems, sat upright like a statue. His skin was pale gray. His lips, darkened by embalming oils, had been stitched shut in a delicate X. His eyes mercifully were closed. Candles ringed the room, and salt had been poured in a perfect circle around the dais. She wanted to faint. She didn't. She was told to kneel. The priest began to chant in an ancient tongue. She didn't understand the words, but the tone made her stomach turn. It was the sound of something ancient. Something that never should have been woken. She lowered her head. Her fingers curled beneath her knees. Then she saw it. Tucked just under the king's sleeve, a fold in the golden fabric disturbed ever so slightly as though by wind or intention. A corner of parchment. Her name was written on it. Not a title. Not bride. Not sacrifice. Her name, Elira. Her breath caught in her chest. She dared not move. Not in front of the priest. Not under the Queen Regent's eyes. But as the final chant ended and the candles flickered low, a gust of air moved through the sanctum, and the letter slipped free from the sleeve and fluttered onto her lap. No one else seemed to see it. She curled her fingers around it and did not breathe. The priest declared the wedding done. The Queen Regent kissed her brow. You may rest now, royal wife. Elira was escorted back to the tower. Her hands did not stop shaking. When the guards left her alone and the bolt fell into place, she unfolded the letter in her trembling fingers. Read. If you are reading this, then they chose you. You were never meant to die here. The queen lies. Trust no one. Beneath the throne there is a door. It opens only to your blood. Her knees gave out. She clutched the paper to her chest, and for the first time in her life she did not know what she believed. But she knew this: the king had written her name before he died. And that meant someone had known her before she ever knew herself. The walls of the tower room sweated with cold. Elira sat in the center, the silver wedding dress half peeled from her shoulders, its brocade limp with hours of stillness. Her knees ached from kneeling before the dead king. Her fingertips had turned purple from gripping the parchment too tightly for too long. The letter now lay flat across her lap. Its ink had not faded. The parchment bore no royal seal. No insignia, no wax. Only her name, Elira, written with precision in a curling hand, and the hurried message beneath it. She had read it 20 times already. If you are reading this, then they chose you. You were never meant to die here. The queen lies. Trust no one. Beneath the throne there is a door. It opens only to your blood. It made no sense. The king had died 2 weeks ago by official count. His body, waxen and still, had been sealed and anointed, preserved with sacred oils and guarded by spell and salt. And yet this letter had been tucked beneath his sleeve, addressed directly to her. She was a nobody. A girl from the outskirts. A baker's daughter with no surname, no wealth, no knowledge of court rituals or sacred rites. How had the king, already dead, written to her? And more terrifying still, if he hadn't written it after death, it meant he'd written it before. Which meant he'd known this moment was coming. Had chosen her. Or worse, warned her. She couldn't sleep. Her bed, though velvet-lined and warmer than her home's entire hearth, felt like a trap. Every creak of the tower stones made her chest seize. Every flutter of wind at the window startled her back to alertness. When the candle burned low, she reread the letter again. Her eyes caught on one word this time: trust. Don't trust the Queen Regent. There had been no malice in the Queen's eyes earlier that day. Only distance. Cold, ceremonial detachment. She had spoken of duty, of sacred unions, of traditions older than crowns themselves. But she had not spoken of Elira's choice. She had not asked. And that, Elira now realized, was its own kind of violence. She looked toward the folded dress across the room, the one laid out for her morning appearance. Pale blue threaded with gold. Widow's colors. The symbolism chilled her. She approached the narrow window. From there she could see the western courtyard. Empty save for a few guards with lanterns. Their paths repeated like clockwork. One walked beneath her tower every 7 minutes. She wondered if anyone would stop her if she screamed. She didn't try. Instead, she tucked the parchment into the lining of her bodice beside her heart. It crinkled with every breath, but she needed it close. Proof that she wasn't losing her mind. Evidence that she hadn't imagined her name written in a dead king's hand. The moon passed overhead in silence. Near midnight she heard footsteps. Not on the stairs, through the wall. Elira froze. The sound was faint, like the shuffle of robes across stone. She pressed her ear to the cold bricks, heart thudding. There was something, not speech, not quite, but a rhythm. A low scrape and a breath. Almost like someone was waiting just on the other side. She backed away. There was no door in this room besides the one the guards used. No secret panel. No trap door that she could see. But the letter had mentioned one. Beneath the throne. That throne, the one the dead king had been seated in when she was forced to kneel beside him. His hands folded over his lap, the smell of incense burning too thick, too sweet. The priest chanting until her ears rang. There had been something strange about the floor beneath him. Now, in hindsight, she remembered it clearly. The platform wasn't carved from stone like the rest of the hall. It had been dark wood, old and polished. And when the wind blew through the sanctum, the platform had groaned softly, not like stone should. It had echoed. She shivered. They had taken her from that chamber quickly after the ritual. Guards escorted her without a word, her arms stiff from stillness. She hadn't even had time to study the body closely. Only to see the hand, that one pale waxy hand, resting atop the folded sleeve. And the slip of parchment sliding loose. What had he meant, the king? Why leave her a message only she could read? Why her? Elira leaned against the wall again and let her head fall back. Sleep came only briefly. She dreamed of cold fingers brushing her cheek. Of chains clinking in still water. and of a voice, familiar and deep, whispering her name in the space between heartbeats. When morning came, the tower was colder. A maid brought breakfast, warm oats, tea steeped with cardamom, but still did not speak. Elira tried to ask her something, anything, but the girl only bowed and withdrew. The letter burned against her skin. Later that day, the Queen Regent summoned her again. This time not to the sanctum but to the solar, a high room filled with old maps and dusty sunlight. The Queen poured wine into a single goblet and offered it to her. Elira didn't drink. "I remember when I first married into this court," the Queen said. "It was not by choice either. But the crown doesn't wait for the willing." Elira said nothing. "Tell me, are you frightened?" I don't understand why I'm here." The Queen watched her over the rim of her cup. "You are here because the spirits named you. Your dreams were recorded. Your bloodlines traced. You were the match. But I never dreamed of. You did. Or someone dreamed of you." Elira's spine stiffened. The Queen stood slowly, gliding across the floor with practiced grace. Her fingers brushed the edge of an old tapestry, one that depicted a royal wedding centuries past. The groom in the image bore no face. Only a gold mask. "You've done well, Elira," the Queen said softly. "You should feel honored." She wanted to scream. But the wine smelled too sweet, and the Queen's words were too carefully spoken. When she was dismissed, she returned to her tower shaking. That night she did not light a candle. She waited in darkness. She whispered the letter to herself over and over, committing it to memory. She traced the corners of the parchment and felt its creases, its slightly uneven cut. It wasn't made with palace care. It had been hidden hastily. Beneath the throne there is a door. It opens only to your blood. At midnight she drew a pin from her hair. She pricked her fingertip. She watched as the blood welled and thought of the king's stitched mouth. His eyes too carefully closed. His name signed without a date. The sudden quake in her gut that told her the letter was not a warning, it was a call. And she was beginning to understand what it asked her to become. Ask ChatGPT. The palace was unnaturally silent that night. Even the wind, which usually groaned through the narrow tower windows, had quieted. It was as if the entire keep held its breath. Elira sat still on the edge of the bed, dressed in the ceremonial silver gown once again, her hair freshly brushed until it gleamed like molten coal down her back. No bells chimed. No voices called. No pages ran through the halls announcing the sacred joining of sovereign and consort. This was not the wedding she had imagined as a child. No one sang. No family came. Not even the stars were allowed to watch. Just before midnight a knock came, soft, deliberate. Elira rose on trembling legs. Her door opened to reveal two figures, a priest in ceremonial robes stitched with midnight blue, and behind him, a silent guard cloaked in shadow. Neither bowed. Neither spoke. They turned and Elira followed. The halls were lit only by candlelight. No torches blazed. No chandeliers swung above. The corridor they walked seemed foreign to her, though she now knew the eastern wing of the palace by heart. This route dipped lower with each step, descending into a part of the keep that smelled of stone, wax, and something older, something closed and too long. The priest did not look at her once. They reached the sanctum again, the same chamber where she had knelt beside the embalmed king, where the strange wind had rustled the sleeves of his corpse, where the letter had fallen into her lap. Tonight the room felt colder. The salt circle had been refreshed. New candles had been placed. But the king's body remained seated on the throne. So, unblinking. Waiting. The Queen Regent stood beside him. She wore black tonight, not mourning black but a ceremonial black laced with red thread. Her hair was wrapped in a high knot. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers pressed together so tightly the bones showed through the skin. Elira approached the throne and bowed her head. There were no vows. No binding cloth. No audience to witness. The priest spoke in a low voice, repeating old rites that were meant to echo across halls and temples, but here they were swallowed by the stone. When he spoke the name of the king, his voice cracked once and a candle flickered. Elira dared not look up. When the priest turned to her, he did not ask if she accepted the bond. He merely raised a blade. She blinked, too stunned to flinch, as he sliced a thin line across her palm. The blood was caught in a golden bowl. From his sleeve, he removed a thin vial and added a drop to the bowl, some ancient oil viscous and sweet-smelling. He stirred it with a silver rod. Then he smeared the mixture across her brow, her lips, and the back of her neck. The Queen Regent stepped forward with something in her hands, a circlet of woven bone, pale and delicate. She set it atop Elira's head and whispered, You are now bound by blood and breath to the last sovereign of Elenra. The king did not move. But the air grew colder. Elira felt the silence lodge itself in her throat, thick and unmoving. The ceremony ended not with a kiss, nor with a feast, nor with celebration. The priest turned, bowed once and left the room. The queen gestured silently for the guards and Elira was led away. The same candlelit corridor greeted her, but the silence now pressed heavier. Every shadow seemed longer. The walls breathed like something asleep but listening. She was returned to her tower cell. The door shut behind her with a finality that made her breath catch. They left her alone. No words of congratulations. No gifts. No smile. Not even the echo of footsteps remained. Just the steady tick of her own heartbeat. She tried to breathe to calm herself, but the silence refused to settle. It echoed like a second pulse in the room, too slow, too deep. She turned toward the window, but even the sky refused to show its face. Clouds masked the moon. The entire world felt paused. She was a bride. But no one had come to see it. She removed the circlet from her head and placed it on the table. Her blood had dried on her palm. She wrapped it in cloth and sat with her back to the door, waiting for sleep. It didn't come. Hours passed. The shadows in the corners shifted, stretching in ways shadows shouldn't. The floor creaked, though no one walked it. Somewhere in the walls, a whisper moved like breath. She lay down eventually but did not close her eyes. When dawn bled into the stone, it brought no warmth. A different maid arrived with food. This one was older, her back hunched and her eyes downcast. She didn't speak. Didn't look up. She left the tray near the door and turned so quickly she nearly dropped the spoon. Elira called after her, but the door was already closing. That day no one came. The window revealed no sun, only fog. She paced the room for hours. Her stomach growled, but the food turned her mouth dry. She touched the circlet once and it pulsed faintly beneath her fingers. She looked for the letter. Still tucked into the hem of her gown, still dry and firm. She reread it. Every word. Every curl of ink. You were never meant to die here. The queen lies. The words carved deeper now. That night there was no ceremony. No summons. No flickering candlelight. Just silence. Until the wall behind her bed made a sound, a low thump like something shifting inside. She froze. She pressed her ear to the stone. There it was again. Not knocking exactly but movement, scratching. As if something were rearranging itself on the other side. She stepped back quickly. The next morning there were no birds outside. The courtyard below stood empty. The sky was gray and heavy. No one came for her. No one spoke to her. No one celebrated. She was the king's bride. But she had never felt more alone. Asked ChatGPT. The night began like the others. Silence soaked into every stone of the tower. Elira had grown used to it by now. Or at least she pretended she had. The quiet pressed against her chest like damp cloth. She no longer asked questions when the maids ignored her, when food was left without a word, when hours passed without sound or company. She was the corpse's bride. She had stopped expecting anything else. But that night something was different. She couldn't name it at first. The sky outside was still dark, blanketed in heavy clouds. The candles had guttered out early, but that was not unusual. The air, however, tasted wrong. Not just cold, damp. Like open soil after rain. Like a freshly opened grave. Elira shifted beneath the covers. She hadn't slept well for days and her body begged for rest. But her skin prickled. Her ears strained. Something tugged at her from the edge of sleep. And then she heard it, the distant echo of stone groaning. Not the casual creak of age or shifting mortar. This was deliberate. A long, slow moan of movement. Followed by silence. Then another sound. Heavy. Dull. A thud. Elira sat up. She wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and crept to the window. From her tower she could just barely make out the edge of the inner courtyard. It was empty. No guards. No torches. Just fog rolling in thick and low across the stones. She strained her eyes. Something stirred below. A shadow, a flicker of motion, too fast and too fluid to be wind. Then came the next sound, the rattle of chains. Not near her door. Somewhere deeper. Beneath. It echoed through the foundation of the palace like a heartbeat, slow, dragging, metal on stone. She backed away from the window. The noise faded again. She waited in silence, but sleep would not return. Not with the taste of wet soil on her tongue. Not with the memory of that sound. Hours passed. She must have dozed just briefly because the next thing she knew, sunlight, thin and gray, seeped through the cracks in the tower window. And there were voices. Not near her room but far below. Guards speaking in clipped whispers too low to catch words. Boots echoing in the stone corridors. Someone barked an order, muffled, then silence again. Her meal tray arrived late. It was brought by a boy she'd never seen before. Younger than the others, wide-eyed, trembling. He didn't set the tray down gently like the others had. He dropped it and fled before she could ask anything. The tea sloshed over the edge. She stared at it for a long time before she touched it. That evening, a second knock came, a sound she'd begun to think she would never hear again. 2 guards waited at her door. "Come," one said. They did not tell her where they were taking her, but she knew the way. Her feet remembered the steps toward the sanctum. Her stomach coiled tighter with each level descended. When they opened the heavy wooden door to the chamber, she nearly cried out. The throne was empty. Where once the dead king had sat, waxen, still, anointed with oils and adorned with jewels, there was now only a twisted cloth and the hollow imprint of a body long held there. Elira turned toward the guards, her voice caught in her throat. Where is he?" They did not answer. Instead, her eyes scanned the room. The salt circle had been broken. The candles unlit. The air carried that same scent, earth, wet and fresh. The scent she'd tasted in her sleep. And then, as she stepped closer to the dais, she saw it. A trail. Brown smears on the floor. Uneven footprints, wide, sunken. Not booted. Not barefoot. Dragged. Mud trailed from the throne's base to the far side of the room, where the wall seemed strangely damp. The stone there was darkened as if it had been scrubbed, poorly. She followed the trail with her eyes. It led nowhere. The guards did not speak. She turned back toward the throne. Her eyes caught something beneath the velvet drapery, a scrap of cloth, part of the royal robe, snagged on a jagged edge. And something else. A small, round beetle, slick with mud, crawling across the base of the seat. The king had been moved. No explanation was given. No priest called. The guards escorted her back to her room without a word. That night she could not sleep. She didn't even try. She sat on the floor near the window, gripping the hem of her cloak, rocking gently in silence. Her hands had gone cold. The letter remained pressed against her chest, tucked in its usual place. She reread it again and again in her mind. You were never meant to die here. What was happening? Who moved the king? Why was no one speaking? As the hours passed, her candle flickered down to its final stub. Just as it died, the sound returned. Chains. Closer now. Not underfoot, above. As though something moved along the ceiling, dragging metal links across stone. Elira pressed herself to the wall. The sound moved slowly, unhurried. Not clattering, deliberate. She could hear each link stretch and pull. And beneath it, a faint scrape, like bare feet on flagstone. Then silence. Then a second scrape, as though something heavy had turned. She couldn't breathe. And then, laughter. Soft. Broken. Not joyful, but like the sound of someone remembering they had a mouth. She curled into herself, arms wrapped tight. It passed. But the smell of earth lingered. When the morning finally came, she stood and looked into the mirror beside her bed. There, on the edge of her collarbone, was a smear of mud. She hadn't gone outside. She hadn't left the tower. She hadn't touched soil in days. And yet it was there. As though something had leaned in while she slept. Or watched. Or returned. Asked ChatGPT. The next morning, the palace corridors were even quieter than usual. Elira heard no footsteps outside her chamber. No trays were delivered. No knock came at her door. She sat by the window, cold tea untouched beside her, staring down at the stone courtyard below. The fog hadn't lifted in days. It clung to everything like a warning, thick, damp, hiding the edges of things. It blurred the outline of the guard towers, made the spires of the eastern wing look like broken teeth. The world felt less real with every hour. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a guard who entered. Nor a maid. It was a servant she had never seen before. He was tall, thin, with graying skin like parchment stretched too tightly over bone. His clothes were plain and colorless, though they hung in oddly clean folds. But what struck her most, what froze her entirely, was his mouth. It was sewn shut. Not with surgical neatness, but with thick black thread, crisscrossed in brutal, uneven stitches. The skin around his lips was puckered, scarred, as though the thread had been pulled too tight, tearing over time, resewn again and again. He didn't speak. Couldn't. He bowed, once deeply, and held out a small silver plate. On it, a single black key. Her voice caught in her throat. What is that for? He said nothing. He tilted the plate forward gently as if encouraging her to take it. She hesitated. The servant watched her with eyes that were far too calm. When she finally reached out and took the key, it was cold, colder than metal should be. It had weight. A thin spiral design was etched at the base, half worn away by time. Before she could ask anything more, the servant turned and walked out, closing the door silently behind him. She clutched the key for a long time. She did not recognize it. She had never seen a lock in the palace that resembled it. But the moment her fingers closed around it, the letter in her dress pulsed faintly, the one from the dead king, the one with her name. Beneath the throne there is a door. It opens only to your blood. She remembered the dragged mud, the broken salt circle, the sounds of chains. The body missing. The body returned. And now this, a key brought by a man who had no mouth. That evening she watched the hall from the crack beneath her door. She waited for another footfall, another knock, anything to suggest the palace still breathed. But it remained still. When darkness fully fell and no one came to light her candles, she moved. She left her tower room barefoot, cloaked in silence. She clutched the key tightly. No guards waited at the end of the hall. No footsteps echoed behind her. Even the wind was gone, as though the very air had fallen asleep. She crept through the empty halls until she reached the sanctum. The door was unlocked. It groaned as it opened, a long exhale into darkness. The throne still stood at the far end, bathed in pale moonlight streaming through the high stained glass. The corpse of the king had been returned, now seated again on the high-backed chair, his eyes closed, hands folded. Elira stepped forward slowly, heart hammering. She circled the throne. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, but she forced herself closer. She pressed a palm to the base. And there, hidden beneath the carved wood, almost invisible in the shadows, was a small keyhole. A perfect fit for the key she held. Her fingers trembled as she inserted it. The lock clicked once and the floor beneath the throne groaned. A low grinding sound followed. The throne shuddered and began to shift, dragging backward slowly along invisible tracks. Dust rose. Air rushed up from below, damp, stale and full of rot. A stairwell revealed itself beneath the dais. Spiraling stone steps led downward into blackness. She stared. Then, a sound behind her. Not footsteps. Breathing. She spun, heart in her throat. The stitched-lipped servant stood at the edge of the room, watching. He raised one hand and pointed to the stairwell. Then he pressed a finger to the black threads over his mouth. Silence. Go. Elira turned back toward the stairs. She stepped down. The cold hit her instantly. Each step down was a descent into another world. The air thickened, the silence sharpened. Her footfalls echoed like tiny screams. The stairwell wound downward far longer than she'd expected. At the bottom, a corridor stretched ahead. Torches lit by unseen hands lined the walls. Their flames flickered blue. She walked carefully, her hands brushing the walls for balance. Bones were etched into the stone here, images of skeletons dancing, of chained ghosts, of crowns held in clawed hands. And at the end of the corridor, a door. Not just any door. Massive, carved from black wood, ironbound with a spiral pattern like the one on the key. Her blood pounded in her ears. She didn't need the key this time. The door opened at her touch. Inside was a chamber that smelled of turned earth, of old blood, of whispered names. In the center of the room, a pool of water shimmered, pitch black and still. And around it, seated on thrones of stone, were bodies. Not skeletons. Not statues. Corpses. Their mouths were stitched. Their hands rested on their laps. Their crowns gleamed. Elira stumbled backward. The dead kings. All of them. Watching. Waiting. She turned, and there at the far side of the pool, stood the king she had married. Still dressed in his ceremonial robes. Still waxen. But now, his eyes were open. His lips moved slowly, straining against their seams. And in her mind a voice spoke. You have come. Good. Now you must listen. Behind her, the stitched-lipped servant descended the stairs. And this time he knelt. Not to the king. But to her. Ask ChatGPT. The symbols began appearing 3 days after she descended into the chamber of the stitched kings. At first they were small, barely noticeable. A mark scratched lightly onto the wood near her bedpost. A curl of paint on the stone above the fireplace. A crescent etched into the window ledge, nearly faded into the grain. They weren't there before. She would have seen them. But now they multiplied. Each morning new ones. Lines. Spirals. The shape of a hand missing its fingers. A crown cracked at the center. Elira stared at them long and hard. She touched them, traced them, waited to see if they vanished under her fingers. But they stayed. They deepened. And soon she noticed something stranger. When she turned away, they moved. The crescent curled into a spiral. The handprints split into roots. The marks rearranged themselves slowly, deliberately. They weren't decorations. They were directions. She followed. One evening, long after the last bell tolled from the east wing, Elira walked through the palace in silence, holding nothing but a single candlestick. The wax dripped slowly as she trailed her hand along the walls, her fingers brushing against new symbols that glimmered faintly as she passed. They appeared one after the next, one beside a tapestry of the founding war, one behind a cracked mirror in the Queen Regent's abandoned solar, and another on a stone pillar just outside the sanctum. The last mark led her to the western wing, a part of the palace now sealed off and said to be decaying. The door had been nailed shut. But when she arrived, she found the nails on the ground, rusted, fallen as if spat out by the wood itself. She entered. The hallway beyond was choked with dust. Tapestries hung in tatters, the floorboards warped. The air was dry, almost brittle. But the symbols continued, fresh, recent, shining faintly with a silvery sheen that pulsed when she neared. They led her to a crooked stairwell hidden behind a bookcase she pushed aside with both hands. Down again. Always down. She counted the steps. There were 83. Then a small landing. Then a door made of cracked pine wood. It opened on its own. She stepped inside. The room was wide, tall-ceilinged, and airless. Her candle's flame bent sideways as if blown from within. The walls, every inch of them, were painted, not with color but with shadow. Ink and charcoal. Murals, stretching from floor to ceiling, layered with dust and age. Portraits stared back at her. Dozens of faces. Each one royal, she could tell by the collars, the medallions, the eyes. Kings with stern jaws. Queens with braided hair and eyes like knives. Brothers and generals. High priestesses. They were marked by sigils, lineages, royal houses, the tree of blood. But many had been defaced. Lines were cut across their eyes. Some had their mouths blackened with ink. Others had their crowns painted upside down. Elira moved slowly past them. Each portrait bore a name burned beneath it in fine letters. Most were familiar from stories: King Vadran the First Flame, Queen Lyria of the Silver Walk, the Butcher Twin, the Drowned Monarch. Legends. Monsters. But at the far end of the room, past a cracked pillar and a fallen brazier, was a mural unlike the rest. It was not a painting of a monarch. It was a scene. A battle? No. A prophecy. The style was older, messier, but more intense. Painted in red and silver, ash and pitch. It showed a crumbling kingdom. A palace aflame. A river split in two. And standing in the middle of it all, at the heart of the storm, a girl. Young. Barefoot. Her hair was braided to one side. She held no crown. Wore no armor. But the land bowed toward her feet. The palace behind her was split down the center, and shadows curled away from her like mist pulled back by wind. She wore Elira's face. Exactly. Every feature. Every line. Even the mark on her cheek, the scar she'd gotten as a child when she fell from the orchard wall. It was her. Below the painting, a single line of script was carved into the stone. The last heir. Elira staggered back. She read it again. Last heir. She shook her head. No. Her family had been poor. Her mother had died sick, her father broken. They were nothing. No legacy. No name. She was no heir, let alone the last. She'd grown up with dirt under her nails, not royal blood in her veins. But the girl in the mural said otherwise. And the mural didn't lie. Neither did the stitched kings. The shadows in the palace hadn't turned from her. They'd cleared paths. The key. The chamber. The servant with no mouth bowing to her. The queen's eyes never quite meeting hers. Elira reached out and touched the wall below the mural. It was warm. A heartbeat thudded beneath the stone, once. Then again. She jerked her hand away. Behind her, something moved. She turned sharply. The air felt thinner. In the silence, a whisper moved past her ear, a woman's voice, soft, old, full of ash. You were hidden to be kept. Not to be forgotten. Elira froze. The whisper faded. When she looked back at the mural, the girl in the center had changed. Her mouth, once closed, was now slightly open. And from it, threads of silver paint flowed outward, connecting to the land, the palace, the sky. Tied to everything. She looked around the chamber again. The ruined portraits. The blackened mouths. The upside-down crowns. This was not a gallery. It was a tomb. A record of what was, and what would be. And she was painted last. No frame. No date. Just her name in silence, waiting for her to read it aloud. But she didn't. Not yet. She turned from the mural and followed the trail of symbols again, newly aware that they glowed a little brighter now. She would find the Queen Regent. And when she did, she would ask why. And this time she would not leave the room in silence. The Queen Regent came for her not long after she returned from the chamber. No guards. No announcement. Just a cold draft through her door, and then there she stood, tall, wrapped in green velvet, a veil half drawn across her face. Her eyes gleamed like polished onyx, and the silence behind her stretched like a blade. Elira didn't speak. She simply stepped back and let the woman enter. The door closed itself. The queen moved like a figure carved from marble, graceful and impossibly still. She walked to the center of the room and folded her hands. I assume you've seen the mural. Elira's throat was dry. You knew. Of course. She turned slowly, the veil slipping down to reveal her face. Not unkind, but unreadable. Beautiful the way a frozen lake is, still, glittering, deadly beneath the surface. We all knew. Those of us who mattered. Elira stared. Then why the marriage? The queen tilted her head. Because if you were made wife to a corpse and laid to rest with him in spirit, your bloodline would symbolically die. There would be no heir. No challenge. I would remain regent until the line faded from memory. But I'm not dead, Elira whispered. The queen's mouth twitched. No. Because the dead king was sentimental. He left a letter, didn't he? Elira's fingers twitched at the hidden fold of her bodice. She didn't answer. He loved prophecy, the queen continued. Thought it romantic, I suppose. Even when the signs were clear, the star-born child, the scar, the year of ash. You were hidden, yes, but not well. I warned him. I told him not to write it down. But he believed the realm needed truth. As if the truth ever held a kingdom together. He named me his heir, Elira said quietly. The queen smiled, but there was no joy in it. He did. A final act. Foolish and unratified. Signed in the hours before death. No witness, no seal. Worthless. Elira's voice was steadier than she expected. He wrote it with my name. His hand. You can't erase that. I don't have to. The queen stepped forward. You forget. The kingdom already saw your wedding. However secret, the ritual was complete. You are his widow. You are buried with him in name and right. You were never crowned. You were never acknowledged. And if I speak? The queen laughed softly. Who will listen? The nobles are loyal to my coin. The priests are bound by my oath. And the people, do you think they'd follow a girl dragged from the mud and married to a corpse? You are nothing to them but a story. And stories can be burned. Elira stared. Her heart pounded not from fear, but fury. The queen watched her with practiced calm. You should have stayed in your tower. You should have played the silent bride. But now that you've wandered, now that the shadows remember you, things have shifted. Elira met her gaze. Then why not kill me now? Because I can't. The queen's voice cracked just for a breath. The kings below have marked you. I felt it. The halls don't echo for me anymore. The throne is cold when I sit. The salt won't hold. You've already started to wake them. She took a step closer. But hear me, girl. Blood doesn't rule. Power does. And I've ruled longer than you've been alive. I can make you disappear in 1,000 ways. I can bury you in gold and silk, and no one will notice you were gasping for breath. Elira didn't flinch. The queen's voice turned to ice. So choose now. Remain quiet, and live. Or speak, and be unmade. She waited. Elira said nothing. The queen studied her one last time. Then, with a flick of her hand, turned and walked out, leaving behind the chill of lies woven into velvet. Ask ChatGPT. It began with a flicker. Not in the candlelight, but in the air, just above her heart, where the letter had been hidden for days. Elira had read it so many times the parchment felt like skin, each word etched into her bones. She didn't know how many hours had passed since the Queen Regent left, her threats coiled tight around every sentence. But Elira hadn't moved. Not until the heat touched her collarbone. She looked down. The corner of the letter was glowing, faintly then brighter. She gasped and reached for it, but the parchment curled inward, darkening, cracking. No. She tore it from her dress. It slipped through her hands like silk turning to ash. The flame consumed it from the edges inward, not red or orange but blue. Cold, silent. It did not smoke. It did not burn the floor. It simply disappeared, leaving nothing. Nothing but silence. She stood shaking, her hands outstretched, empty. And then the whisper. At first it sounded like wind seeping through stone, a breath behind the walls. Then it took shape. You must rise. She spun, heart pounding. No one was there. Just the door, the hearth, the cracked mirror. But something had changed. She stepped toward the wall where she usually traced the symbols. There, faint, freshly carved into the stone, were the words from the letter. Not the whole message. Only fragments. Don't trust the queen. You were never meant to die here. The blood remembers. Her breath caught. She touched the letters. The stone was warm. Her room had become the page. You must rise, the voice said again, louder this time, clearer. It was the king's voice. Not when he was alive. Not in court. But as he must have sounded before death. Solemn, frayed, certain. Each night after it returned. Not just in her mind but in the corners of her room, in the creak of the door, in the flicker of shadow. It spoke to her through cold drafts and firelight. And always the same command. You must rise. The words carved into the wall grew. Each morning she woke to find new ones. The throne rejects her. The root remains. Crown the forgotten. The queen regent did not return. But Aelira knew the palace had already turned against her. The halls no longer held echoes when the queen walked. The birds did not perch near her chamber window. And once, late at night, Aelira heard the sound of weeping, low, bitter, just outside her door. When she opened it, the corridor was empty, and salt had been spilled across the threshold. She did not clean it. She stepped over it. By the seventh night, the king's whisper had become a presence, not haunting but watchful. She began to speak aloud in the dark, not to herself but to him. What do I do? Silence. Then. You already know. And she did. Not with her mind. But with her marrow. With the blood that warmed when she touched the carvings. With the ache that grew in her palms each time she traced the spiral mark left from the key. She was not a bride. She was a seed. And something ancient had been waiting for her to bloom. Ask ChatGPT. The ritual was meant to be quiet. No trumpets, no priests. Just a girl, a corpse, and a knife. Aelira was summoned at dusk. 2 guards escorted her from her chamber, their faces blank as slate. She did not resist. She walked between them with her head high, though her heart beat like war drums. They brought her to the sanctum, the place of thrones and ghosts, the chamber where her life had been tied to a rotting crown. The king's body lay on the marble slab, dressed once again in burial robes, blue and silver, embroidered with vines and wolves. A thin crown rested against his forehead. His hands, folded over his chest, had been bound with fresh ribbons of gold. The queen regent stood behind him, flanked by 2 robed witnesses who did not speak or move. Aelira stepped forward. The queen's voice was calm. The blood seal completes the bond. A drop upon his lips, and your place in the order of things is finished. Finished, buried, bound forever to silence. Aelira didn't look at her. She stepped to the slab, the stone biting cold through the soles of her shoes. The scent of incense and death lingered in the air, thick and metallic. The candlelight flickered. The queen handed her a ceremonial blade. Silver. Cling. Waiting. Aelira took it. She raised the blade slowly and turned it on herself. The sharp edge kissed her palm and she drew a clean, fast line across the skin. Blood welled immediately, warm, dark hers. She looked at the corpse. At the king who had sent her a letter from beyond the grave. At the man whose voice had whispered in her walls. At the sovereign who had seen her in a prophecy long before she knew her name. She let the blood fall. A single drop landed on his lips. For one breath nothing happened. Then he inhaled. A soft, rattling sound. His eyes opened. Not wide, not wild, but gently, slowly. The pupils were clear, color untouched by death. He looked at her with the same gaze she had felt in her bones for nights now. No horror. No scream. Just peace. She didn't move. Neither did the queen. And then the king spoke. Not with lips but with voice, everywhere at once. In the walls. In the floor. In her blood. Take it back. Aelira's breath caught. The queen staggered. The robed witnesses gasped. One of them fell to their knees, clutching their ears. The candles blew out in a sudden wind. Take it back, he said again, louder this time, and the words struck like a storm. The air trembled. The golden ribbons burned away. The stone slab cracked. Then his body fell still. His eyes closed. The silence afterward was not emptiness, it was charged, waiting. Aelira stood frozen, her bleeding palm pulsing. The queen stared at her, lips parted, fury blooming beneath disbelief. But Aelira was already turning. She walked from the chamber without a word, the blood on her hand glowing faintly in the dark. The words followed her down the hall like footsteps. Take it back. And she would. The throne room doors opened without touch. Aelira stepped through them alone. No guards flanked her. No procession. No crown weighed her head, only the memory of blood, the echo of a dead king's voice, and the sting of the cut across her palm, now wrapped in a strip of black cloth. The hall stretched wide before her, gold-tiled and hushed. The throne at its far end loomed like a mountain. And standing at the base of it, in full ceremonial armor, was the Queen Regent. She no longer wore veils. Her silver blade was drawn, its edge catching the sunbeam through the stained glass. Her posture was perfect, a statue carved from ambition. Around her, nobles clustered near the pillars, watching in tight-lipped silence. Servants peeked from corners. The guards held their ground but did not move to stop Aelira. The queen's voice rang across the marble. You come to steal what was never yours. Aelira kept walking. The queen raised the blade. You have no right. No coronation. No council. You are nothing. Aelira reached the center of the hall. She stopped. And behind her, the doors creaked wider. Footsteps followed, not soft, not rushed. Slow. Heavy. Measured. Dozens. Hundreds. The queen turned just slightly. And saw them. The dead. They came in silence, kings and queens, generals and servants, bones and royal cloth, eyes hollow and glowing faintly with memory. The stitched-lipped servant walked at the front, his gaze steady. The others flanked him, the mural ghosts, the forgotten heirs, the slain. They formed a line behind Aelira. Not kneeling. Standing. Watching. The queen staggered back a step. This is blasphemy, she hissed. This is rot. Illusion. But her voice cracked. The nobles did not defend her. The guards didn't draw their swords. The dead did not need to speak. Aelira stepped forward. The queen raised her blade. Aelira raised only her hand, and from her palm, the black cloth unraveled. The cut still bled, slowly, but the blood shimmered like silver now. It pulsed in time with something beneath the stone floor, as if the palace itself had a heartbeat. The throne behind the queen groaned. Its gold dulled. The crimson cushion blackened as if scorched. The queen backed away. You don't understand, she said. If they follow you, they will never sleep again. I don't want them to sleep, Aelira said quietly. I want them remembered. Then she raised her palm toward the throne. And the dead moved forward. The queen turned, dropped her blade, and ran. No one stopped her. The nobles parted. The guards stood still. And the moment her shadow vanished from the hall, the silence lifted. Aelira walked to the throne. She did not kneel. She sat. And the dead bowed their heads, not in subservience but in recognition. That night, they say, a new wind swept through the palace. Candles lit themselves. The stone warmed. And from the crypt below, no groans came, only humming. They say the new queen speaks with the dead. They say the dead answer. They say the throne no longer rules the living alone. And the girl who once married a corpse now rules with the memory of every forgotten name. Ask ChatGPT.